It was a quiet evening in late September, the kind of night when the summer warmth lingered just long enough to make you nostalgic. In the suburban outskirts of Austin, Texas, Mike Harrington sat in his modest living room, sipping on a cold beer while absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone. His wife, Laura, was out, as she often was these days. She'd mentioned something about dinner with friends from work, but the details had been vague, leaving him with a nagging feeling he couldn't quite shake. Mike wasn't one for drama. At 37, he'd built a comfortable life, working as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech firm. He wasn't flashy or outgoing, more the dependable, steady type. His dark hair had started to show a few streaks of gray, but he carried it well, his fit frame a testament to his regular gym visits. Mike prided himself on being a good husband to Laura and a present father to their 8-year-old son, Ethan. Laura, on the other hand, was his opposite in so many ways. Where Mike was quiet and reserved, she was outgoing and charismatic, lighting up any room she entered. With her striking green eyes, sun-kissed auburn hair, and a laugh that could make anyone smile, Laura had always been the center of attention. She worked as a marketing executive, a career that seemed perfectly tailored to her charm and wit. They had met in college, and for years their differences complemented each other. But lately, those differences felt more like divides. That evening, as Mike watched the clock tick past 9 p.m., he couldn't ignore the unease bubbling beneath the surface. Laura had been distant for weeks, months if he was honest. There were the late nights at work, the sudden new wardrobe, and the way she'd been glued to her phone, laughing at texts she never cared to explain. Mike wasn't the paranoid type, but even he couldn't deny that something felt off. It wasn't just the little things either. Their conversations had become hollow, a far cry from the deep, meaningful talks they used to have. When they were together, it was like she was only halfway there, her mind somewhere else entirely. Ethan had noticed too. "Why is Mom always so busy?" he'd asked one night after dinner, his innocent eyes searching Mike's for answers he didn't have. Mike had brushed it off with a vague, "She's just working hard." But it had stung. Deep down, he feared what he was starting to piece together. Flashback to 6 months earlier. Their marriage had seemed solid, or so Mike thought. Sure, they had the occasional argument, but what couple didn't? Laura had been promoted to a senior position at her firm, and they'd celebrated with a weekend getaway to the Texas Hill Country. It was during that trip that Laura had seemed different. She'd been unusually quiet, her phone constantly buzzing with messages. When Mike asked about it, she waved it off, claiming it was just work. But the way she clutched her phone so tightly, guarding it as if it held state secrets, had left him unsettled. That was the first time Mike felt the creeping suspicion that something wasn't right. He'd pushed the thought aside, not wanting to believe that Laura, the woman he'd loved for over a decade, could be hiding something from him. But as the months passed, the signs became harder to ignore. Laura's late nights at the office turned into networking events and girls' nights out. Her excuses were plausible enough, but they always came with a vague edge that left Mike wondering. Then there was the perfume, an expensive floral scent he didn't recognize. She'd never been one for fancy fragrances before, so why now? When he casually mentioned it, she'd brushed it off with a laugh, saying it was a gift from a coworker. But her explanation didn't sit right with him. Back in the present, Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair as he glanced at the clock again. 9:30 p.m. Laura still hadn't texted or called to let him know when she'd be home. Ethan was fast asleep upstairs, and the house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Unable to sit still any longer, Mike got up and grabbed his laptop, deciding to distract himself with work. But even as he typed away, his mind kept drifting back to Laura. Just as he was about to shut down his laptop, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura. "Running late. Don't wait up. Love you." Mike stared at the screen for a long moment. The words felt hollow, almost robotic, like something she'd typed out of obligation rather than genuine affection. He wanted to believe her, but his gut told him otherwise. With a heavy sigh, he set his phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. How had they gotten here? When had things started to unravel? It was around this time that Mike began to wonder if he should take action. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but the lack of answers was eating away at him. Was he imagining things? Or was there something deeper going on? He didn't want to be that husband, the one who snooped through his wife's things, questioning her every move. But how could he ignore the growing distance between them? The next morning, Laura was up early, her usual radiant self as she bustled around the kitchen making breakfast for Ethan. Mike watched her from across the room, studying her every move. She seemed happy, almost too happy. It was like she was overcompensating, putting on a show to mask whatever was really going on. "Morning," she chirped, flashing him a bright smile. "Morning," Mike replied, his tone neutral. He wanted to confront her, to ask her outright if there was someone else. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. Not yet. He needed proof, something concrete to justify the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "Big plans for today?" Laura asked casually, pouring a glass of orange juice for Ethan. "Just the usual," Mike said, his eyes never leaving hers. "What about you?" "Oh, the same. Meetings, emails, the usual grind," she said with a shrug, her tone light and breezy. But Mike noticed the way she avoided his gaze, the subtle tension in her shoulders. She was hiding something, he was sure of it now. The question was, what? As the weeks went on, Mike found himself sinking deeper into a pit of doubt and uncertainty. He started paying closer attention to Laura's behavior, picking up on every little detail. She was on her phone more than ever, and her excuses for late nights became increasingly flimsy. Then there were the mysterious charges on their credit card, fancy dinners at restaurants he'd never been to, hotel bookings in the city. When he confronted her about the charges, she claimed they were work-related expenses, reimbursed by the company. But her explanation felt rehearsed, and Mike couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying. It wasn't long before he decided to take matters into his own hands. As the weeks passed, Mike's suspicions began to weigh heavier on him, like a stone he couldn't shake off. Each time Laura left the house with another vague excuse, the knot in his stomach tightened. He wanted to trust her, wanted to believe that their marriage wasn't unraveling. But the signs were there, glaringly obvious, and they were impossible to ignore. One Friday night, after Laura had left for yet another work event, Mike decided he couldn't sit idle any longer. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Fueled by equal parts fear and determination, he did something he never thought he'd do. He opened her laptop. Mike knew her password. They'd set them up together years ago. As the screen lit up, his heart raced. He felt like he was crossing a line, invading her privacy. But wasn't it justified? If she had nothing to hide, then what harm could it do? That was the question he kept repeating to himself like a mantra. As he scrolled through her emails, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. Work memos, newsletters, online shopping receipts. It all looked innocent enough. But then he noticed a folder labeled Personal. His stomach churned as he clicked on it. Inside were dozens of emails between Laura and someone named Alex. At first, the messages seemed harmless, just friendly banter about work projects and shared interests. But as Mike scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages became flirtatious, laced with inside jokes and suggestive comments. Then, he found one that hit him like a punch to the gut. "Last night was incredible," Alex had written. "I can't stop thinking about you. Counting down the days until I see you again." Mike stared at the screen, his vision blurring as a mix of anger, heartbreak, and betrayal coursed through him. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't believe it. But the evidence was right there in front of him. Laura was having an affair. The next day, Mike couldn't bring himself to confront Laura. Instead, he spent the entire morning replaying their last few months together, analyzing every conversation, every interaction. How had he missed the signs? Was it his fault? Had he been too focused on work, too complacent in their marriage? When Laura came downstairs, her cheerful demeanor only fueled his frustration. How could she act so normal, so unbothered, when she was carrying on this secret life? Mike clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Morning," she said brightly. pouring herself a cup of coffee. "What's the plan for today?" Mike forced a smile, though it felt like his face might crack. "Nothing much. Thought I'd take Ethan to the park." "Sounds nice," she replied, sipping her coffee. "I have a few errands to run later, but I should be back by dinner." There it was again, that vague excuse. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. Mike's blood boiled, but he stayed silent, knowing that if he confronted her now, it would only escalate into a shouting match. He needed to be strategic, to plan his next move carefully. That afternoon, Mike met up with his best friend, Greg, at a local sports bar. Greg had been his confidant since college, the one person Mike could always count on for advice. "I think she's cheating on me," Mike blurted out as soon as they sat down. Greg raised an eyebrow, setting down his beer. "What makes you say that?" Mike explained everything, the late nights, the distant behavior, the emails. As he spoke, Greg listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Man, that's rough," Greg said when Mike finished. "But are you sure? I mean, have you talked to her about it?" Mike shook his head. "Not yet. I don't even know how to bring it up. What if she denies it? What if she turns it around on me?" "Look, you need to be direct," Greg said firmly. "You can't just sit on this and let it eat you alive. If she's cheating, you deserve to know the truth. And if she's not, well, at least you'll have some peace of mind." Mike nodded, though he wasn't convinced. The thought of confronting Laura filled him with dread. But he knew Greg was right. He couldn't live like this, constantly second-guessing, walking on eggshells. He had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, Mike decided to test the waters. As they sat on the couch watching TV, he casually brought up the topic of trust. "You know," he began, keeping his tone light, "I read this article today about how a lot of couples struggle with trust issues. It got me thinking about us." Laura glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "What about us?" "I don't know," Mike said with a shrug. "I guess I was just wondering if there's anything we could work on, you know, to make things stronger." Laura hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I think we're fine, Mike. Every marriage has its ups and downs, but I'd say we're doing pretty well." Her response felt rehearsed, almost dismissive. Mike's chest tightened. He wanted to push further, to ask her outright if there was someone else. But the words caught in his throat. He wasn't ready, not yet. Over the next few days, Mike became increasingly paranoid. He started keeping a closer eye on Laura's schedule, noting the times she left the house and the excuses she gave. He even installed a tracking app on her phone, a move that made him feel both ashamed and desperate. But his need for answers outweighed his guilt. What he discovered only confirmed his worst fears. Laura wasn't going to errands or work events. She was meeting Alex. The tracker showed her at a fancy downtown restaurant one evening, and at a hotel the next. Mike's heart sank with each notification, the betrayal cutting deeper with every new discovery. It wasn't long before the tension between them reached a boiling point. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table with Ethan, Mike couldn't hold it in any longer. "Where were you last night?" he asked abruptly, his voice sharp. Laura looked up, startled. "I told you I was working late." "Really?" Mike said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Because your work seems to take you to some pretty interesting places these days." Ethan glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Can I be excused?" he asked quietly. Mike nodded, forcing a smile. "Go finish your homework, buddy." Once Ethan was out of earshot, Mike turned back to Laura, his anger bubbling to the surface. "I know about Alex." Laura's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Laura. I've seen the emails. I know you've been meeting him." For a moment, Laura said nothing. Then, she let out a shaky sigh, her shoulders slumping. "Mike, I can explain." "I don't want an explanation," Mike snapped. "I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" The room fell into a suffocating silence after Laura's hesitant admission. For the first time since they'd met, Mike saw something in her eyes that looked like genuine regret. But regret wasn't enough. Not now, not after what he'd uncovered. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. How long, Laura? Mike's voice was tight, barely above a whisper. How long have you been lying to me? Laura looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, her usual confidence replaced by a trembling unease. A few months, she finally said, her voice barely audible. It just happened. Mike scoffed, pushing back his chair with a screech. It just happened? Don't give me that. You don't accidentally start sneaking off to hotels and lying to your husband. Her head snapped up, a spark of defensiveness flickering in her eyes. It wasn't like that, Mike. I never planned for any of this. I felt so distant from you. We've been stuck in this routine for years. And You what? Mike interrupted, his voice rising. Decided to blow up our entire marriage instead of talking to me about it? I didn't know how to talk to you. She shot back, her voice cracking. You're always so busy, so wrapped up in your own world. I felt invisible, Mike. Like I didn't matter anymore. Mike stared at her, his anger momentarily giving way to disbelief. So your solution was to go behind my back? To cheat on me instead of telling me how you felt? Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds? Laura flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. But Mike wasn't done. He'd held in his feelings for too long, and now they were spilling out like a dam that had finally burst. You didn't even think about Ethan, did you? About how this would affect him? God, Laura, what were you thinking? I wasn't, she admitted, her voice trembling. I wasn't thinking about anything except how miserable I was. And I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. Mike shook his head, his chest heaving with a mix of rage and heartbreak. You've destroyed everything, Laura. Do you even understand that? Everything we built, everything we promised each other. It's all gone. The days that followed were a blur of tense silence and forced civility. For Ethan's sake, they both pretended that things were normal, but the cracks in their facade were painfully obvious. Ethan might have been young, but he wasn't stupid. He could sense the shift in the air, the unspoken tension that hung heavy in every room. Mike spent his nights in the guest bedroom, unable to bring himself to sleep next to Laura. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her with Alex, laughing, kissing, sharing moments that should have been his. The images tormented him, fueling a burning resentment that threatened to consume him. Laura, for her part, seemed to be trying to make amends. She cooked dinner every night, cleaned the house meticulously, and went out of her way to be attentive to Ethan. But Mike saw through it all. He knew she was just trying to ease her guilt, to salvage what little remained of their marriage. And honestly, he didn't know if it was working. One evening, about a week after their confrontation, Mike received a text from Greg. How are you holding up? Let's grab a drink. Mike hesitated before replying. He wasn't in the mood for company, but he also didn't want to sit at home, stewing in his anger. So he texted back, sure, meet you at O'Malley's in 30. When he arrived at the bar, Greg was already waiting with 2 beers in front of him. He greeted Mike with a firm pat on the back and a knowing look. You look like hell, Greg said, sliding a beer across the table. Mike let out a humorless laugh. That's because I feel like hell. Greg nodded, taking a sip of his drink. So what's the plan? Are you going to try to work things out? Or? Mike stared at his beer, his mind racing. I don't know, man. Part of me wants to just call it quits, to walk away and never look back. But then I think about Ethan and I don't know if I can do that to him. Greg leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if there's even a part of you that thinks this marriage is worth saving, you owe it to yourself and to Ethan to try. Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. And what if it's not worth saving? What if I can't ever trust her again? Then you'll know you did everything you could, Greg said simply. But you won't know unless you try. That conversation stuck with Mike as he drove home. He didn't want to forgive Laura, didn't want to let her off the hook for what she'd done. But he also didn't want to make a decision he might regret later. For better or worse, they'd built a life together, a life that included their son. Wasn't that worth fighting for? When he walked through the door, he found Laura sitting on the couch, flipping through a photo album. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red from crying. "Hey," she said softly. "How was your night?" Mike hesitated, then sat down across from her. "Fine. Greg says hi." Laura nodded, glancing down at the photo album. "I was just looking at these, remembering how happy we used to be." Mike's gaze fell on the album, on the photos of their wedding day, their family vacations, Ethan's first birthday. A lump formed in his throat as he realized just how much they'd lost. "Do you think we can ever get back to that?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike didn't answer right away. He didn't know if he could. But for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more compelling stories like this. Your support helps keep the channel going. Cheating story script. Section 4, 1200 words. Tension in the household reached a boiling point. Mike and Laura barely spoke to each other, each interaction layered with unspoken accusations and unresolved pain. Ethan, perceptive as ever, started retreating to his room more often, his usual chatter replaced with unnerving silence. One Saturday afternoon, Mike decided he couldn't let this limbo drag on any longer. He had spent the morning pacing the guest room, replaying Greg's advice in his head. If there was any chance of salvaging his marriage, he needed to confront the situation head-on. Laura was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner when Mike walked in. The clink of the knife against the cutting board filled the silence as he stood there, gathering his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. "We need to talk." Laura froze for a moment before setting the knife down. She wiped her hands on a towel and turned to face him, her expression a mixture of guilt and apprehension. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's talk." They moved to the living room, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. Mike sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly together. Laura perched on the armrest of a chair across from him, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I need to know," Mike began, his voice steady but firm. "Do you even want to fix this? Or am I just holding on to something that's already gone?" Laura's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I don't know, Mike. I want to. I think I do. But I've messed everything up so badly. How can we even begin to fix this?" Mike leaned forward, his gaze intense. "It starts with honesty, Laura. No more secrets, no more lies. I need to know everything. How it started, why it happened, and whether you're still seeing him." Laura flinched at his words but nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything." Over the next hour, Laura laid it all out. The flirtatious conversations that escalated into something more, the stolen moments during work hours, and the guilt that gnawed at her even as she continued the affair. She admitted that she had ended things with Alex shortly after Mike confronted her, but the damage had already been done. Mike listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each new revelation. By the time Laura finished, he felt like he'd been punched in the gut all over again. But there was also a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, everything was out in the open. "Do you love him?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Laura said firmly. "I never loved him. I don't even know why I let it happen. It wasn't about him, it was about me. About feeling wanted. Feeling alive." Mike let out a bitter laugh. "And destroying our family was worth it for that?" Tears streamed down Laura's face. "No, it wasn't worth it. None of it was. I hate myself for what I've done, Mike. But if there's any chance we can fix this, I'll do whatever it takes." Mike stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry and willing to change. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. In the days that followed, they began the painstaking process of trying to rebuild their relationship. They started seeing a marriage counselor, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patel, who didn't shy away from asking tough questions. Each session was emotionally exhausting, but it also forced them to confront their feelings in ways they hadn't before. For Mike, the hardest part was letting go of his anger. Every time he saw Laura, he was reminded of her betrayal. But he also couldn't ignore the small moments of vulnerability she shared. The way her voice trembled when she talked about her guilt, or the way she clung to him during their rare moments of intimacy. For Laura, the challenge was proving that she was truly committed to making things right. She deleted Alex's number, cut off all contact with him, and even offered to quit her job if it would help Mike feel more secure. Mike insisted that she didn't need to go that far, but her willingness to do so spoke volumes. Ethan, meanwhile, started to come out of his shell as the atmosphere at home began to improve. He still didn't know the full details of what had happened, but he could sense that his parents were trying. And for now, that was enough. But just when it seemed like they were making progress, an unexpected twist threatened to derail everything. Mike was at work one afternoon when his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, thought you should know your wife's been texting Alex again. Check her phone if you don't believe me. Asterisk. His heart sank as he read the message. He didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to think that Laura would betray him again after everything they'd been through. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it quickly took root. That evening, after dinner, Mike waited until Laura was in the shower before he picked up her phone from the counter. His hands trembled as he unlocked it, guilt and anger warring within him. At first, he didn't find anything suspicious. But then he opened her messaging app and saw a thread labeled, Alex. His stomach churned as he scrolled through the messages. They weren't overly flirtatious, but the fact that she had been communicating with him at all felt like a betrayal. When Laura came downstairs, Mike was waiting for her, her phone in his hand. Care to explain this? He said, his voice cold. Laura froze, her face going pale. Mike, I can explain. I don't want excuses, Laura. I want the truth. She took a deep breath, her eyes pleading. He texted me first. I didn't respond at first, but then he said he needed closure, and I thought it would help if I just talked to him one last time. Mike shook his head, his anger bubbling to the surface. One last time? That's what you said the first time you ended it. How am I supposed to believe you now? I wasn't trying to hide it, Laura insisted. If I wanted to, I could have deleted the messages, but I didn't. I'm trying, Mike. I really am. But Mike wasn't convinced. To him, it felt like history repeating itself, and he didn't know if he could go through the pain of betrayal all over again. This revelation sent their progress into a tailspin. Mike became distant again, retreating to the guest room and barely speaking to Laura. She, in turn, became increasingly desperate, trying to prove her sincerity but only pushing Mike further away. Ethan picked up on the tension immediately and confronted his parents one evening. Are you two getting a divorce? He asked bluntly, his voice trembling. Mike and Laura exchanged a glance, both of them at a loss for words. We're trying to work things out, Mike said finally. But it's complicated. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I just want things to go back to the way they were. His words hit them both like a punch to the gut. They realized that their actions weren't just affecting each other. They were affecting their son in ways they hadn't fully acknowledged. In the end, it was Ethan who became the catalyst for change. His vulnerability reminded Mike and Laura of what was truly at stake, and it gave them the motivation they needed to keep fighting for their family. Slowly but surely, they began to rebuild the fragile foundation of their marriage. It wasn't easy and it wasn't always pretty, but they were determined to try, for Ethan's sake if not for their own. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more compelling content like this. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this emotional journey. The weeks that followed were nothing short of a roller coaster. Mike and Laura were stuck in an exhausting cycle of progress and setbacks, their relationship teetering on the edge of collapse. Ethan, though young, bore the weight of their struggles, his once cheerful demeanor now shadowed by anxiety. For Mike, every moment felt like a test of endurance, one that he wasn't sure he could pass. But the pivotal moment came one Thursday afternoon, when a seemingly innocuous event shattered the fragile equilibrium they'd been trying to maintain. Laura was at work, her focus fractured as she shuffled through papers. Her colleague Lisa leaned over the cubicle wall, her voice low but tinged with urgency. "Laura," she whispered, "I think you should see this." Laura frowned, stepping out of her cubicle to follow Lisa. In the break room, a small group of coworkers had gathered around a laptop. The murmurs of hushed voices grew louder as Laura approached. "What's going on?" Laura asked, her stomach twisting with unease. Lisa turned the laptop toward her, revealing a social media post that made Laura's blood run cold. It was a photo of her and Alex from months ago, walking out of a restaurant together. The caption was damning, "When office hours aren't enough." Laura's heart raced as the implications of the post sank in. It didn't take long for the whispers to start, the kind that spread like wildfire in a corporate setting. Her reputation was at stake, and she knew that this scandal could reach Mike before she had the chance to explain. Meanwhile, Mike was at home, sorting through the mail when his phone buzzed with a notification. He unlocked it to find an email forwarded by a concerned friend. Attached was the same incriminating photo, accompanied by a message that read, "You might want to address this before it gets worse." Mike stared at the screen, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. He thought they were past this, thought that Laura had left Alex behind. But now, it seemed like her lies had resurfaced in a way that could no longer be ignored. By the time Laura walked through the door that evening, Mike was waiting in the living room, the forwarded email open on his phone. "Care to explain this?" he said, his voice cold and unwavering. Laura froze, her eyes darting to the phone in his hand. She didn't need to look to know what he was talking about. Her heart sank as she realized just how badly this could end. "Mike, I can explain," she began, but he cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Explain? You said you ended things with him. You said you were done. Was that just another lie?" "No," Laura protested, tears welling in her eyes. "That picture is old, Mike. It was taken months ago before I ended things. I swear to you, I haven't seen him since." Mike stared at her, his expression unreadable. "And I'm supposed to believe that? After everything, how do you expect me to trust you?" Laura's voice broke as she pleaded with him. "I don't know how to make you believe me, Mike, but I'm telling you the truth. Please, you have to believe me." Their argument carried on late into the night, the tension escalating with every exchange. Ethan, who had been trying to focus on his homework upstairs, finally came down when he couldn't take the shouting anymore. "Stop it!" he yelled, his voice trembling with emotion. "Why can't you two just stop fighting?" Mike and Laura both froze, their anger dissipating in the face of Ethan's distress. Laura reached out to him, but he stepped back, tears streaming down his face. "I just want things to be normal again," he sobbed. "Why can't you just fix it?" The sight of their son breaking down hit Mike and Laura like a sledgehammer. In that moment, they realized that their constant fighting was doing more harm than either of them had anticipated. They both knelt down, their voices soft and full of regret as they tried to comfort him. The next day, Mike took a personal day from work. He needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. He spent hours driving aimlessly around town, replaying the past few months in his mind. The betrayal, the counseling sessions, the fleeting moments of hope, they all blurred together in a haze of frustration and heartbreak. As the sun began to set, he found himself parked outside the small diner where he and Laura used to go on date nights. The memories of their happier days came flooding back, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of clarity. If he truly wanted to move forward, he needed to make a decision, one that would determine the fate of their family. He couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between love and resentment. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, Mike returned home to find Laura sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Mike," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Let me speak," he said, his voice calm but firm. He sat down across from her, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her heart pound. "I've spent all day thinking about this," he said, "and I've realized something. No matter how much I love you, no matter how much I want to fix this, I can't do it alone." You have to meet me halfway, Laura. You have to show me that you're willing to fight for us, not just say the words. Laura nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I will, Mike. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. He leaned forward, his expression softening. Then we start over. We rebuild from the ground up. But this is your last chance, Laura. If I see even the slightest hint of dishonesty, we're done. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I understand, and I won't let you down. Over the next few weeks, Mike and Laura threw themselves into rebuilding their marriage with a renewed sense of determination. They attended counseling sessions twice a week, where they delved into the root causes of their issues. Laura opened up about her insecurities and the reasons behind her actions, while Mike confronted his own feelings of inadequacy and resentment. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when Mike lay awake, wondering if he was making a mistake. But there were also moments of hope, like when they spent an afternoon at the park with Ethan, laughing and playing like a family again. Or when Laura surprised Mike with tickets to a concert by his favorite band, a gesture that reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with. Slowly but surely, they began to rediscover the connection that had brought them together in the first place. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. They were both willing to fight for their family, no matter how difficult it might be. If you're invested in this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for the final chapter of this emotional roller coaster. See you next time. The weeks of hard work and counseling had provided some hope, but nothing could prepare Mike and Laura for the unexpected turn of events that would truly test the fragile foundation they had started to rebuild. Just as it seemed they were finding their rhythm again, a bombshell revelation threatened to undo all their progress. It started innocuously, with Laura receiving an email late one evening. She was sitting at the dining table, sorting through a backlog of messages, while Mike helped Ethan with his math homework in the living room. The subject line read, "You should know the truth." Initially, Laura assumed it was spam, but curiosity got the better of her. She clicked on the email, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Attached were screenshots of text messages between Alex and another woman, messages that revealed not only his betrayal of Laura but also a chilling lack of regard for her. One particularly damning message read, "She thinks she's special, but she's just another notch on the belt. Can't wait to move on to someone less clingy." Laura's hands trembled as she scrolled through the screenshots, the weight of her shame crashing down on her. She had risked everything for a man who saw her as nothing more than a conquest. The humiliation was unbearable, but what terrified her even more was the thought of Mike finding out. How could she face him, knowing she had nearly thrown away their family for someone so undeserving? Meanwhile, Mike had noticed Laura's unusual silence and wandered into the dining room to check on her. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her pale face and the email displayed on her laptop screen. "What's that?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Laura slammed the laptop shut, her eyes wide with panic. "It's nothing," she stammered, but her reaction only fueled Mike's curiosity. "Don't lie to me, Laura," he said, his voice rising. "What are you hiding now?" Laura's resolve crumbled under the weight of her guilt. She opened the laptop again and turned it toward him, tears streaming down her face. Mike scanned the messages, his expression darkening with every word. By the time he finished, his hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white with tension. "So this is the man you risked our family for?" he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "This is who you thought was worth destroying everything?" Laura broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was stupid, Mike. I was blind and selfish, and I hate myself for it. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't know he was like this." Mike's anger boiled over, but instead of yelling, he stood silently for a moment, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "I can't keep doing this, Laura. Every time I think we're moving forward, something pulls us back. You say you're sorry, but how do I know it won't happen again?" Laura reached out to him, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Mike, I'll do anything to make this right. I'll quit my job, Cut off everyone from the past. Whatever it takes. But Mike stepped back, his gaze hard and unyielding. It's not about your job or cutting people off. It's about trust. And right now, I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. The next few days were a blur of tension and avoidance. Mike threw himself into work, staying late at the office to avoid coming home. Laura, on the other hand, tried to salvage what she could, sending Mike heartfelt messages and leaving notes for him around the house. But he barely acknowledged her efforts, his demeanor cold and distant. Ethan, ever perceptive, picked up on the shift in their dynamic and grew more withdrawn. One evening, he asked Laura a question that cut her to the core. "Mom, are you and Dad going to get a divorce?" Laura knelt down to his level, her heart breaking at the fear in his eyes. "We're trying, sweetie," she said softly. "We're doing everything we can to stay together. But you're still fighting," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I just want us to be happy again." The turning point came on a Saturday morning, when Mike unexpectedly ran into Alex at a local coffee shop. The encounter was nothing short of explosive. Mike had gone out for a walk to clear his head and decided to grab a coffee. As he waited in line, he heard a familiar voice behind him. He turned around to see Alex, looking as smug as ever, chatting with a barista. The sight of him was like a spark to dry tinder. Before Mike could think, he marched up to Alex, his anger boiling over. "You've got some nerve," Mike said, his voice low and dangerous. Alex looked startled but quickly regained his composure, smirking in that infuriatingly smug way. "Well, if it isn't the husband. Didn't think I'd run into you here." Mike's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think this is funny? You think wrecking someone's family is just a game?" Alex shrugged, his smirk widening. "Relax, man. It's not my fault your wife came to me. Maybe if you'd been better at your job, she wouldn't have needed someone else." That was the final straw. Mike lunged at Alex, shoving him against the counter. The barista screamed, and other customers scrambled to get out of the way as the two men scuffled. It took two bystanders to pull Mike off Alex, who was now sporting a bloody nose and a look of genuine fear. "You stay away from my family?" Mike growled, his voice trembling with rage. "If I ever see you near them again, you'll regret it." The confrontation left Mike shaken, but it also gave him a sense of clarity. He realized that his anger, though justified, was consuming him. If he truly wanted to move forward, he needed to let go of the bitterness and focus on what mattered most: his family. When he got home that evening, he found Laura sitting on the couch, staring at the family photo on the mantel. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Mike," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I need to say something," he said, his voice steady. "I've been angry for a long time, and I think I have every right to be. But holding on to that anger isn't helping anyone. Not me, not you, and definitely not Ethan. So here's the deal. I'm willing to give this one last shot. But it has to be real this time. No more lies, no more secrets. We rebuild from the ground up or we walk away for good. Deal?" Laura nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Deal," she whispered. That night marked a new beginning for Mike and Laura. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it wouldn't erase the pain of the past. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt a glimmer of hope. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll explore the resolution of this emotional journey. See you soon. In the weeks that followed Mike's confrontation with Alex, the storm surrounding his and Laura's marriage began to settle. But let's be real, it wasn't like everything magically became perfect. Healing a broken relationship takes more than a single decision or dramatic encounter. It's a daily grind, a constant effort to rebuild what was lost while letting go of the hurt. For Mike and Laura, this process started with something simple but vital: honesty. The kind of brutal, unflinching honesty that hurts in the moment but clears the path for growth. They sat down one evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, and laid everything on the table. Every doubt, every fear, every piece of pain they had bottled up over the past year. "I can't promise that I'll never hurt you again," Laura admitted, her voice trembling. "But I swear I will never betray you like that again. I've learned my lesson, Mike, and I don't ever want to be the kind of person who could do that to someone they love." Mike nodded, his expression softening for the first time in days. "And I'll try to let go of my anger. I know I've held on to it like a shield, but if we're going to move forward, I need to stop letting it control me. For you, for Ethan, and for myself." It was the first real step toward something better. But as anyone who's been through it knows, forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a journey. And Mike and Laura were just beginning theirs. Ethan, meanwhile, was the silent observer to all these changes. At first, he remained cautious, not wanting to get his hopes up. But as the weeks turned into months, he started to see the difference in his parents. They argued less, laughed a little more, and even started spending more time together as a family. It was subtle at first. A shared joke at the dinner table, a rare movie night on the couch. But it was enough to give Ethan the sense that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. One Saturday morning, Mike surprised both Laura and Ethan by suggesting a family day at the park. It had been years since they'd done something so simple yet meaningful. They packed a picnic, brought along a frisbee, and spent the day laughing, running around, and, for a few precious hours, forgetting all the pain they had endured. Watching Mike and Laura joking and playfully competing over who could throw the frisbee farther, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. Maybe his family wasn't perfect, but it was his, and that was enough. But not everything wrapped up neatly. The fallout from Laura's affair with Alex still lingered in unexpected ways. For one, Alex's reputation in the community took a nosedive after the email scandal came to light. Several of his other questionable relationships were exposed, and his career took a significant hit. Karma, as they say, had done its job. As for Laura, she chose to leave her job shortly after. It wasn't just about distancing herself from Alex. It was about starting fresh, free from the shadows of her past mistakes. She found a position at a smaller firm, one that allowed her more flexibility to spend time with her family. It wasn't as glamorous as her previous job, but it gave her a sense of purpose and a chance to rebuild her professional reputation on her own terms. Mike, too, underwent his own transformation. He started attending a men's support group, something he'd initially scoffed at but eventually realized he needed. Talking to other men who had been through similar experiences helped him process his emotions in a way he hadn't been able to before. It gave him perspective, reminding him that he wasn't alone in his struggles and that healing was possible. By the time their anniversary rolled around, a date neither of them had been sure they'd even reach, Mike and Laura decided to mark the occasion in a low-key but meaningful way. They exchanged simple gifts, but more importantly, they exchanged heartfelt letters, each expressing gratitude for the other's willingness to fight for their marriage. Laura's letter read, "Mike, I know I hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for, but I hope you know how much I admire your strength, your resilience, and your capacity to forgive. You are a better man than I deserve, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the woman you deserve." Mike's response was equally emotional. "Laura, I won't lie and say it's been easy, but I believe in us. I believe in the family we've built and the love that's still here, even after everything. Thank you for not giving up, even when I wanted to. Together, I think we can make it." They spent the evening sitting by the fire, sharing stories of their early days together, and for the first time in years, it felt like they were truly reconnecting. As the months passed, Mike and Laura's relationship continued to strengthen. It wasn't perfect, what relationship is, but they had learned to communicate better, to listen more, and to put in the effort that love requires. Ethan, now more secure in his parents' relationship, began thriving in his own way. His grades improved, his confidence grew, and he even started playing on the school basketball team. Watching him blossom was a reminder to both Mike and Laura of why they had chosen to fight for their family in the first place. By the end of the year, Mike and Laura felt like they had turned a corner. They knew there would always be scars, remnants of the pain they had endured, but those scars were a testament to their resilience, a reminder that love, when nurtured and fought for, can endure even the deepest wounds. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the night sky, Mike and Laura stood on the porch, holding hands. Ethan was inside, watching the countdown on TV, his laughter echoing through the house. Mike turned to Laura, a small smile playing on his lips. "We made it," he said softly. Laura nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yeah, we did." As they leaned in for a kiss, the clock struck midnight, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. And that's how this story comes to an end. A tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately redemption. Mike and Laura's journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a reminder that love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them and choosing to grow together, even when the road is rough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more heartfelt tales like this one. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. See you in the next video. Thank you for joining me on this journey.